Hello, thanks for having me. Let me try to share here. And,
Perfect.
okay,
Great.
we see that?
Yes, spot on.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Glad to be here and really excited by some of the talks. I feel a little out of place in a sense because this is my first real digital twin conference, but the talks I've been able to make it to have been really compelling and I'm really learning a lot. Also different in the sense that you may have noticed I'm not Australian. I'm coming to you from Canada. I'm in Western Canada, just outside Vancouver, BC, in the Salish Sea. I'm on the traditional territories and current territories of the Tsuut'ina people, and I'm very glad to be welcomed to live and work in this beautiful place. On a personal note, I spent about the last 10 years of my life as an academic, doing research and teaching around kind of geospatial, environmental change, spatial analysis methods, Earth observation. So I wasn't sure how much kind of geospatial nerding out to do in this talk, but I can see I'm in good company by some of the talks so far. So that's good. I now work at Global Spatial Technology Solutions. So I'm director of data science, and we are focused on maritime AI and machine learning, kind of developing solutions for the maritime sector. So this is different again in the sense that this is very domain focused on the maritime space. But as a place that's surrounded by lots of ocean, maybe it will be draw some parallels to the work that's being done here in this session. Ooh. So let me just see if we can move that. So a little bit about the company first. Yeah, I've kind of been in this role for a couple of years. We are a global maritime intelligence company doing kind of solutions in the maritime space, a lot of machine learning and AI. So delivering that solutions through software as a service platform and a kind of broader ecosystem. We call it Oceana, but also APIs, dashboards, and kind of custom analytics. Working broadly with government users in the kind of defense and civil space for looking at some things like Coast Guard, Navy, risk elements in the maritime space. And on the commercial side, which we'll be talking a little bit more about today, with ports and shipping lines and things to do with the maritime supply chain. Some of the kind of supporters of our projects on the government side include Canadian Space Agency, ISCD, Transport Canada, as well as some other international bodies. But yeah, the kind of context here is the maritime sector has been going through a lot of change and is increasingly exposed to different shocks and stressors and new kind of dynamics. So things like extreme weather, so greater storms, higher tides, shoreline erosion, causing need for more planning, more simulation, more understanding in the maritime domain. Integration with landside processes like rail and truck, and trying to having digitalization initiatives in different sectors that are in different phases and having that linkage between the vessels that are coming in from abroad, interacting at the port and moving cargo onto the land. We saw probably first with COVID-19, but also, as we'll talk about a little bit later, more recently, lots, shocks to the system. That was maybe the first time the kind of vulnerability of the supply chain, the maritime supply chain, became apparent to everybody. So it has kind of emerged during a period of relative global stability, which is now being upended a little bit. So the ability to bring technology to bear to look at those stressors and shocks and simulate scenarios is, I think there's a real scope for digital twin type technology. Where I live so I'm in Western Canada. I'm looking out the Salish Sea right now. There's a lot of community concern about shipping. So that's whether that's effect of anchorages or emissions or effects on, we have the southern resident killer whale here, which is a protected marine species. And so having things to do with vessel noise, or rerouting them around areas where they've been detected or their critical habitat areas is a key kind of element, as well as just general kind of impacts of vessel traffic on the kind of terrestrial as well as the marine landscape. At the same time, there's new regulations. So there's international regulations around shipping and emissions. So there's a great effort towards decarbonization of the industry as a whole, which makes up almost 3% of global emissions. So there's new kind of metrics in terms of moving vessels around the Earth, minimizing emissions, having things maybe not move always at the fastest speed so that they can arrive on time and not sit at anchor for weeks on end. So there's a lot of change in the space, which is requiring, and there's also an opportunity for these new types of tools. It doesn't take, you don't have to look too far in the news to find articles about shipping and some of the shocks and stressors and threats that are at play. So the Panama Canal, due to drought, has a really significantly reduced throughput in terms of ships being able to transit the canal. There's activity in the Middle East that is causing a lot of vessel carriers to reroute their operations, taking longer trips, adding costs to the carriers, adding costs to the downstream cargo and where that ends up in the marketplace. So it's really just in the last 3 or 4 years, these kind of risks and threats have been increasing greatly. Which can basically boil down to either geopolitical risk in terms of relations between countries around the Earth and non-state actors around the world changing, and then broader climate change, whether it's sea level rise, extreme weather, localized effects in terms of soil erosion, or shoreline erosion around ports. There's lots and lots of impacts, as we all know, due to climate change. So that's kind of the threat landscape in the maritime domain. The goal, I think, since COVID-19 has really been around, how do we improve the resilience in the maritime sector? So they face challenges that require resilience and adaptability for effective operations. At the same time, there is this increasing digitalization, which is happening at a different rate across different actors, but bringing technology to bear in an industry where it's maybe later than other industries to kind of get up to speed with using data and models to enhance decision making. And all of that, bringing those technologies to bear to also to kind of mitigate risk and ensure the smooth functioning of those supply chains. One thing is that they are adaptive, and when events happen, they will quickly adapt, but being able to forecast those events and play out scenarios is, I think, a really compelling area for digital twins. So the current kind of information landscape, I'm just going to give a little bit of a picture, at least from the Canadian perspective, in terms of maritime information sharing, is like this, where we've got a lot of different actors, a lot of different data sets, and different actors collecting data in different formats and using different semantics and different representations. Some of them sharing data with each other's and PDF or different, less interoperable formats, but having clear needs from ports for optimizing those port operations, for security agencies to know what cargo is coming in the country, for freight forwarders to link with ongoing transit, as well as environmental and fisheries regulations. So what we're working towards is something like this, where we have kind of our Oceania dedicated platform ingesting data. So we work with a lot of ports and government agencies to kind of ensure that we are building solutions that make sense, but ingesting data and then delivering analysis and intelligence to those user groups. It's a little interesting in the sense that, it's kind of extra national, where we're working with government, with ports, with vessel carriers that are kind of moving across the world and interfacing with all sorts of different regulatory bodies, and having all these different kind of actors working in the maritime space with kind of different objectives. And so having a kind of clear platform for data integration is kind of the theme of the idea of the digital twin. Another term you might hear of is digital ocean corridor, or green corridors between ports. And this relies on having a digitized chain between a source port and a destination port, having the terminals, the pilotages, and the vessels having their data digitized. And then we've got solutions that as part of our platform to kind of target different aspects of this digital ocean corridor. So that's kind of the context. The overall maritime supply chain has some distinct characteristics, so I just thought it would be worthwhile to summarize in the sense that it's global. So this is, by definition, a global industry and works across national boundaries as well as within them. It's dynamic. So I'm looking out at the ocean right now, and as we all know, it changes every day. Never the same. So there's now, I think, more than ever, ability to sense what's going on in the ocean, whether through satellite or in situ sensors, and integrate that data into a common geospatial representation can give us kind of really good high-grained intelligence in terms of what's happening in the ocean. It's a complex environment in the sense of having lots of different stakeholders working across jurisdictional boundaries with different objectives at different levels of digitalization. But also multi-scale. So we need, there's some really good presentations earlier today. It was just with the scope of data products that are being made available. And, here we're talking about we need global ocean data sets derived from climate models that might be at 25-kilometer scale, but we also need, centimeter resolution products in and around, rivers and port areas. And we need those linked through some common data fabric or data model. Collaborative in the sense that the more these different actors can share data, the more that the system as a whole can benefit, and we can derive kind of our overall objectives in terms of, efficiency, decarbonizing, reducing emissions, protecting species, et cetera. But at the same time, many elements within this supply chain are competing with each other. So there's issues in terms of data sensitivity, and some data can be shared, some data can't be shared. That data needs to be secured in a way that can contribute to models that optimize without sharing proprietary business type information. So as far as digital twins in the maritime sector, there's been a few kind of areas of development. One has been predictive maintenance. So this would be digital replicas of vessels themselves, very, very detailed digital twins of engines and multi propellers and hulls and all the things that make up a vessel. And using that to understand, when specific parts are hitting stressors, when maintenance should be implemented in order to maximize the performance of that asset, minimize downtime. So we've done some work in terms of developing simulators for vessels and being able to simulate effects of different engine components in relation to different ocean environments. There's also some work out there looking at environmental impact assessment, so digital twins supporting environmental impact of different maritime activities, whether it's anchoring or whether we're going to extend port expansion or increase throughput because there's new berths or new technology. So being able to look at and simulate ahead of time the environmental impacts of those changes. And also just with respect to port operations, so the use of, having digital twins of cranes and berths and terminals and operators and tugs and pilots and all the things that go into port operations, digital representations of those, and being able to look at the interaction between those components in order to optimize the overall system as a whole. I'm coming at this from the perspective of having, spent most of my career in geospatial, Earth observation type work, and thinking about like Earth system digital twins. Started to get into more digital Earth type research. So there's a good definition in terms of what a digital Earth or digital Earth framework or Earth system digital twin in terms of a digital replica of an Earth system component, structure, process, phenomena obtained by merging digital modeling, and that is natural and societal sensing data streams. A digital twin of the Earth continuously learns and updates itself and must be seen as a living digital simulation model that modifies and changes itself as physical counterparts change. And we've seen just examples of that very thing today. But it's having the data model, the semantics in place to realize that is obviously incredibly challenging. And for me, like maybe the ocean is a place where it is complex, but it's simpler, I would say, than terrestrial spaces. So thinking about an ocean digital twin as the basis for helping improving supply chain resilience. One of the things that is most important in my view is geospatial data integration. So in order to realize the benefits of big data, machine learning, or AI, you need data in a common, or it helps to have data in a common representation. And this is still a challenge because data will come in different formats, as we all know. And if you're trying to do machine learning or large scale model development, it can be challenging working across those representations. As well, as I mentioned earlier, representation integration across scales of measurements. So very macro scale climate models to very local scale, what's happening right here in the ocean. Remains a challenge, but also a need. So we kind of set forth with this idea of an ocean digital twin to support maritime supply chain resilience. I had some goals in mind. One was this idea of a common data representation or data model for integrating data from all these different sources, having clear open standards for data documentation and processing to enhance interoperability. The two kind of core pieces are, Earth observation models using both statistical and machine learning models to extract the variables of interest from satellite data. And because anything that is in these Earth observation orbits, we can get them in a regular cadence. We can have basically continuous monitoring for the variables that we can capture or that are relevant. And then the other kind of arm of things is numerical modeling of key physical processes, whether that's things like turbidity or currents, tides. We can parameterize those physical processes with EO models and data obtained from remote sensing type models, and bring those into this data model or this common data representation to help look at the scenarios that are of interest for the given use cases. And hopefully that will become a little bit clearer when I show an example, maybe. Enable real-time situational awareness, so having kind of data that's current and showing where the traffic is, where the shipping corridors are, who's on course or off course, what their emissions are in real time, as well as kind of retrospective and prospective scenario modeling in order to kind of address the key questions. So our kind of architecture for this system is I'll probably focus just in the top right hand corner with these kind of three sub boxes. So we've got data coming in. We have this in our platform where we have satellite data, some existing geospatial data. We use some IoT sensors at sometimes. AIS data tracking from terrestrial and satellite sources is one of our key inputs. And then having the analytics data cube as the combination of discrete global grid system as the basis for like space and time representation, a data model, so an implementation linking kind of that grid system into that includes metadata, attribute, kind of key value store, and in a data warehouse, having a dedicated metadata store that documents data lineage and any processing, and then interfaces to that system, whether it be dashboards, API access, connecting through things like R and Python. We're working with large language models for like interacting with data in that data cube. So different ways to kind of interface or access the data in the cube. So that's the kind of core piece that then these other elements, which are the more domain specific models, can link to and then be linked across through that data representation. So the environmental subsystems, we have detection models. So these are kind of Earth observation or satellite-based monitoring of key ocean variables. There's just some that are mentioned there. And then also having some physical process models or dynamic models, which are more of the classic numerical models for looking at physical processes that we want to model. The maritime subsystems are kind of the bread and butter of what our company does, which is develop, solutions for the maritime space. So these exist and are independent of kind of the digital twin idea. But so things like normal behavior models for vessels, for routes, things to do with maritime risk, like detecting and monitoring dark vessels or vessels that turn off their tracking. Identifying rendezvous, so that's been a big one in recent years, where there's illegal at-sea transfers of oil. And so we can identify when vessels are kind of moving together at slow speed in the middle of the ocean and kind of track which vessels are involved in those rendezvous events and where they go after and that sort of thing. So route modeling is obviously of key importance. So given a vessel anywhere on Earth and its destination, what's the estimated time of arrival, what's the route it will take, what is the route it should take if it wants to minimize emissions, minimize cost, etc. A little bit more interesting is like the fleet modeling, which is kind of is optimizing across end vessels in order to achieve or optimize with respect to sometimes competing objectives. And then port models, so optimizing with respect to the port schedule or individual port resources like tugs, pilots, etc. So these kind of three components then flow into different types of scenarios and monitoring, ultimately delivering value to the things that users or the people on the product side of our company are really interested in, which is kind of solving kind of problems in the maritime space for stakeholders and users. So the kind of technologies piece is the analytics data cube, which at present is a GGS system. So I worked on some of this in my research in academia. So taking some of these ideas of kind of ways, so these are multi-resolution grid systems for mapping the Earth. We can parameterize them in different ways, so they're optimized for different parts of the Earth or land versus ocean. And basically they give us kind of a mesh, a multi-resolution mesh we can map data onto, and then we have a way to really quickly access that data within a data warehouse, or do route modeling, or different types of analytics in a scalable way that isn't using geometry. There is a temporal component to the data model in terms of having kind of a cell time attached to each event, as well as a cell space. The other thing in this representation that you can do is capture kind of uncertainty in spatial measurement. So not thinking of things as points, but as cells that capture their measurement error. And then the ideas, or the integrated discrete environmental analytics system, is a kind of a data model for implementing this in a data warehouse that captures spatial temporal attribute metadata. And I think as we move maybe towards a richer ontology in the maritime domain, we might look at a different approach, but that's what we're currently using. And as we mentioned, kind of interfaces into the system for querying and access. So the domain system components, I just wanted to mention was these detection models. So we have models for detecting ice. So for shipping in the Arctic, probably not an issue in Australia, but shipping in the Arctic, knowing where the ice is and what the condition of the ice is important. Integrating weather data and storm forecasting data. We've got a global tide model. We've done some work on localized turbidity estimation. So kind of linking these detection capabilities with the dynamic process models, as I was mentioning. And the maritime subsystems being, those kind of bread and butter maritime ML AI solutions that we've been developing for a number of years. On the scenarios and monitoring side of things, we kind of think of it in terms of types of questions that we'll be asking, whether they're retrospective. So examples being, what would emissions at Port of Vancouver be if they had used an optimized schedule over the past summer, which is maybe using our predictions or forecasts for just-in-time arrivals. If that had been taken, how would that have changed emissions coming from ships? What would have happened to average anchorage use last year if the 3 of them had been removed due to environmental concerns? So anchorage use is a perennial issue in many locations or port cities. So being able to replay what traffic would have looked like if we had removed those, and we have all of the data. What was total CO2 emissions so straightforward kind of query-based analysis, looking at given routes and being able to sum up emissions at a global scale. In the real-time sense, this is more kind of situational awareness. So things like what vessels are currently inbound to Canadian ports. Which is surprisingly a more difficult question to answer than you might think. So in the AIS message data that we receive for vessel tracking, destination is a text-based kind of manual entry. So you get all sorts of wild characters and messages in there, as you can imagine. So we've got models for cleaning those up, as well as looking at where a vessel's gone throughout time, and can we use that to infer where they're likely going based on their current course and heading. Are there any current whale detections in shipping? So marine mammals species protection is a big issue in many areas. We did a complete project on North Atlantic right whale on the East Coast, which has been involved in a lot of entanglements. And I think there's a population of 350 animals left right now. So we built a system for detecting whale detections using high-res satellite data, pushing those detections out and integrating through the system with our AIS or vessel tracking data. So we know or could potentially then reroute traffic around areas where whales have been detected. And then current operational modeling, like what vessels are currently operating with their AIS off. So we've got optical images for detecting vessels. So if we could detect them with optical imagery from satellite, but they have their AIS off, then we know that there's a vessel there that doesn't have its tracking data on. I'll show an example in a second of ice jam risk on the St. Lawrence River. So again, probably not an issue in Australia, but in Canada, it's cold. In the St. Lawrence, which is the main trade artery, there is ice in the winter, and ice jams can significantly block vessel traffic. And you can imagine if you are the Port of Montreal and you're trying to plan your schedule 5, 10, 15, 20 days out, having an understanding of what the likelihood of an ice jam is can be really beneficial to plan, and also to inform vessels as they're coming in so that they don't speed all the way in and then just have to sit there. And again, that's kind of linkage between an environmental type process model and an operational vessel ETA model. What would the impact of 20% of a fleet moving to green ammonia fuels? There's a lot of move towards green fuels in the shipping industry, and people are trying to understand what that means for their emissions profile for the bottom line. When will vessel X depart from vessel from berth? So even very simple questions, which are sometimes very challenging to answer. So I'll quickly go through just some examples of the data. This will probably be my first talk where I'm at the end, I'm coming up to a break, and people are waiting to either, go get a coffee, go get dinner, or go to sleep. So I get that everybody is probably ready for a break soon, but I'll just quickly mention. So here is the Red Sea traffic scenario modeling. So this is in our UI, and we can kind of quickly look at how many unique vessels are in the entrance to the Red Sea. So this is the first 3 weeks on this graph here is the first 3 weeks of November, December, January. And because of the attacks on vessels, and we all probably heard about, there's about we can quickly detect a 50% drop from, say, December. Happened about December 14th. That green line goes down from 100 to around 60, and kind of stays at around 50, and then goes down to 40. So that's would be kind of alert, say quick detection just based on the data. But then we could look at, okay, based on those events, what is the impacts on ETA, so the estimated time of arrival of specific vessels? If that percentage of vessels that are rerouting changes to 80%, what does that mean for the ports who are receiving those vessels, for the tugs and the pilots and the people that are operating those resources in those areas? So those are the sorts of scenarios that we can start to look at when we start linking these things through that common data model. This is another one showing we have an ice jam forecast risk. So this is it's regularly ingesting environment sensor data, primarily from Environment Canada, but also from a few other sources in the winter. And so this is spitting out forecasts for the probability of an ice jam risk on the St. Lawrence River at, I think, 7-day forecasts for 7 days ahead. So here's an event from the newspaper just showing this is 2019, showing some ice jams and then ships getting trapped and not being able to move. And obviously, in terms of the maritime supply chain, that's a big event. So in this graph, we have the green dots is the ice concentration thickness as produced from our model, and the red shaded areas is like the duration of actual ice jam events. So we do get the line across is like our kind of threshold that we arrived at a priori for signaling like this is an alert. So the first two were detected, first one ahead of time quite a bit, I can't remember the time, and the second one just a little bit ahead of time. We could either trigger the threshold based on exceeding that ice concentration thickness or based on the gradient of the change in the predictions. The third one, we kind of caught a gradient and then missed the actual event. So we had a false negative and then a false positive after. But this is the type of thing, if we're kind of optimizing this model to get better and better with better machine learning, better data, better experience. And once we have that trigger, we can then update the vessel ETA models for those who are inbound to the Port of Montreal, for example. We can use that to update the port schedule optimization or port schedule model or optimizer. And that then creating the schedule that impacts the behavior for when the vessels actually do arrive. So then that will impact their GHG footprint, probably their anchoring footprint. So you can really chain together these different models to do this sort of intelligent kind of forecasting and decision support around managing the maritime supply chain with this kind of data cube layer. Another kind of use case is green corridors and ocean environment. So we do GHG tracking. This is, again, in the St. Lawrence. We've got something called an EPM toolkit. So this is carbon dioxide visualized based on vessel kinetics. So we think that, yeah, like the next areas for this, where digital twin, I think, really comes into play in a stronger way outside of the ocean itself, is through connecting the vessel to the landside through landside integrations and this kind of system level optimization. And there's some challenges that remain just based on the technology that we have. One being, data ingestion into this representation is still a bit of a roadblock. Adoption of these actors that we're working with who are at different parts in their digitalization process can be a challenge. And so, thinking about specifications for APIs and data interchange is something we're working on with both government and industrial partners. And then working with some of the regulatory innovation around emissions, but also e-navigation. So that's coming out of the IMO is going to help to standardize some of these and make the digital twin a little bit more of a reality. So a quick acknowledgement to some of our partners and contributors, and I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your attention.